announcement there.
You're listening to Head South Radio with your host, Kat Meyer, a podcast dedicated to prioritizing pleasure and removing the stigma and shame around sex. We're here to be curious and have an open conversation about sexual health and relational wellness. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes. The information discussed is not a substitute for professional medical advice.
Just closing your eyes and settling into your seat, or just softening your gaze. And then start to tune into your breath. Feeling into your seat, let gravity start to drop the weight down. Maybe let the shoulder blades draw towards one another to find a brightness across the front of your chest. And then before we close out the meditation, just taking a moment to set an intention for yourself for this conversation. And taking your time, start to blink the eyes open, taking in the light, taking in your space. Start to take in the screen.
That was beautiful.
Hi, Mint.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for being on Head South Radio. I would love for you to get started, to give us a little idea of who you are, your background, and what you do.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. So everybody calls me Mint. That's the name I answer to. I live in Egypt at the moment, and I've lived in Egypt for most of my life. I'm also Egyptian. And my background ranges from interior architecture to CEO of a company to pole dance and flexibility instructor, and also a somatic sexologist and pleasure-focused sex educator.
And so we met through, my friend Renee met you in a yoga class here in New York, and immediately DM'd me and was like, you need to talk to this woman I just met. And so she was very excited, and I was very excited to speak to you because your work as a somatic sexologist and the people that you are working with is really interesting. And I don't think there's a lot of practitioners who are in your region, in your space, doing the work that you're doing. I haven't really seen too many. I've seen a few like people who specifically work with Muslim women and sex education. Mm-hmm. And so I was really excited to talk to you a little bit about the somatic sexology, how you got into that, and then we'll move into like who you're working with and the work you're doing. So if you could explain what a somatic sexologist is.
Sure, I can. And Kat, you're absolutely right. I mean, there is no, part of the reason why I studied this, I went into somatic sexology wanting to study it because I couldn't find any pleasure-focused sexologists in the region to, to work with. And that's part of the reason. But let me answer your question. So you asked what somatic sexology is. So somatic sexology, let's split the two words up. I find it the easiest to explain in that way. So you have the word sexology, which is the study of sex, right? And then somatic, which is essentially the human body, the study of the body with the consciousness present in the body. So somatic sexology is an approach to the sexual well-being of individuals. And the approach is through the body. And when I say body, it's different than saying physical or physio, because physical is just looking at the body alone without it being a conscious, live mechanism, if you will, or organism, if you will. So basically, somatic is just an approach that goes through the body. However, it's very aware of the fact that we have a living soul and that we're conscious when we are in our bodies. To me, I have been reading and researching a lot specifically about female pleasure. And I had a bunch of different struggles that I was struggling with that I couldn't overcome. And what I found is the study of sexology in a somatic approach was very appropriate for me and really, really worked for me. And I believe the reason is because when we have sex, that is how we have sex. We have sex with our bodies. We're not sitting there across the couch from someone chatting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I find it the very, very appropriate medium to approach sex and pleasure and sexology in general, just because of the fact that it kind of mimics the way that we actually exercise the activity, if you will. But it's not for everyone, but it definitely did work for me.
So my next question is then, does it incorporate movement and touch with the practitioner? So when you're speaking of like the body, so it's not like therapy and working with a sex therapist, you're on a couch talking through.
Yeah.
It's different. And so what is
Yeah.
a session like with your clients?
Yeah. Wow, that's a fantastic question. I'm really glad you asked. So yeah, it's a great one. So basically, there's a set of different techniques. Okay. I mean, I work online. So it basically means that obviously I'm not going to touch people through the screen, right? But the tools that we use when it comes to somatic techniques, and there's a range of different ones, and depending on what you're coming in for and what's happening and where you're at today in your present moments, because we factor that in as well. Sometimes you walk into a session and you're like, oh, I had a great week. I had a great day. You know, let's do something adventurous. I'm all in. And you're full of energy. And then other days you come in and you're just like, can we just take it easy today? I'm feeling a little bit tired and I just want to go really slow. So it really depends what technique. But if we talk about somatic techniques in general, here are the 5 tools that somatic techniques involve. 1 is touch. 2 is sound. 3 is breath. 4 is movement, very accessible movement. And 5 is placement of attention. Where is your attention placed in this moment of time? Now, there are some somatic sexologists who have certifications that allow them to also do hands-on touch work on their patients, be it body, like on the body, and or genital, depending on where you are in the world and what's allowed and what isn't. But there are certifications that allow for that. The most, I'd say like the most well-versed one is sexological bodywork. And then there are other somatic practitioners that are not allowed to do any kinds of hands-on work. And so although they can guide you through the exercise, you're the one doing the touch on your body yourself. So whether the touch happens or not depends on 1, the preference of the person, the preference of the client. And number 2, the licensing of the practitioner and where they are in the world, if that's even allowed or not. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much for breaking that down, because that's actually really helpful, because I have seen the word somatics in a lot of places, and I understand it coming from a place of wellness and working in yoga, but I think a lot of people are seeing that word and not knowing what that means and the combination of the two. And I also think when you were speaking about like, it's not just the physical body, it's working with more subtle bodies, a part of our being. So energetics and the life force that's moving through us. So that makes a lot of sense, that it's touch, it's breath, it's awareness. So it's a lot of things. If you look at like a yoga practice or any other sort of wellness practice, those are all the things that we use and utilize in those modalities. And so it's just the focus is in this specific case in your work around sex, pleasure, and empowering people with the use of their bodies and understanding their bodies better so that they can find their desires, find their pleasure.
Absolutely. And it felt like and it felt like an organic progression for me, or it could also be part of the reason why it was so effective for me, because of the fact that I was so used to doing, I spent so many years essentially teaching and instructing every day. And that means that you're in your body, especially as a pole artist, because as a pole artist, if you're not present, you're on the floor. You're
exactly.
You're on the floor, you're injured. And so you have to be really present in the body. And I think that's part of the reason. And then the second thing was that there were so many learnings that I had picked up that I could not access. They were stored in my body. There were learnings that were conditioned by the environment that I grew up in. I grew up in the Middle East. So yes, I am a very international person. I have a lot of international friends. I have lived in different countries. I'm well traveled. I'm well read, and in my head, there were certain learnings that I had told myself to, let go of this one. This doesn't work for you. And these learnings, this is how you want to lead pleasure in your life. This is the kind of quality sex life that you want to lead. And so everything was in the mind, but my mind and body weren't on the same page. So the beautiful thing about somatic work is somatic work brings your mind and body on the same page. And no matter how many people I talked to, how many books I read, how many workshops I attended, the brain got it. The brain was like, yes, I'm on board. Yes, I agree. Yes, that's exactly what I want to do. But the body was like, we are not getting it, my friend. We have been told the complete opposite our whole lives. What the hell are you doing? So there was like a discrepancy there. But I think that's the beautiful thing about somatic work, that it can just kind of really like update the software of your body.
Oh, I love that. Oh, I just got goosebumps from that. That makes so much sense. And then I'm curious because, mind, body, but what about emotions around it? So the feelings is a third pillar in our human experience.
100%.
And so where does that come into play? Because I have this, we all have those experiences of like, logically, I know this is the reality or this is what's happening, but my body is responding in this way, especially for people who have experienced trauma or, distortion, dissociation. Sometimes you're like, literally, I know, and I'm thinking these things, but my body is responding in a way that like, I feel it's foreign. So how do you,
absolutely,
and then the layer of like emotions around that, the shame, the embarrassment around the disconnect, like my body is not functioning in the way that my mind is. And then I have all these emotions around it.
Absolutely. And you know what? I just want to break down your question and take it part by part. So the very first thing that stood out for me was you saying that feeling like updating the software and then thoughts and emotions, right? So let's talk about the concept of thoughts and emotions. Okay. One of the things as somatic practitioners that we have to work really hard with our clients to teach them to do is to go into the feeling rather than going into the thoughts. And here's the reason why. Every client I receive comes to my session knowing exactly what it is that they want, and trying to find explanations for things because that's what they've been used to, right? The thing is with somatic work, it doesn't matter. What matters is how you feel, So let's say even if you have a goal in the future that you, want to lead a very fulfilling, erotically free, unapologetic life, right? How will that make you feel? And then they'll be like, well, I see myself doing this and doing that. I'm like, yeah, that's great. But how will you feel in that moment in your life, right? And so we really try, especially in a culture around the world, an international culture that has taught us that not being in control of our feelings is bad and that our feelings are going to take us to dangerous places. And that has taught us to not really listen to our feelings. Trying to connect that back again sometimes can be really, really challenging. And so actually with somatic work, we really tap into the feelings. Where do you feel it in your body? How will you feel if this is the case? If your life looks like this, I'm going to feel confident and free and without doubts, I'm going to feel secure. And these are the things that we look at. And then we ask, where do you feel these things in your body? Because you'll realize that these things tend to be consistent. When someone comes up to you and gives you bad news, you might feel a knot in your stomach, for example, or you might feel like a quick, painful flash. And these things are consistent regardless of the situations that happen around you. They're signals for you and your body, and teaching people how to read their body and how to understand their bodies, especially during pleasure experiences, is one of the most liberating things in the world. One, the reason it is because it means they won't need you as a practitioner for the rest of their lives, because you're teaching them tools that they can recruit and use for the rest of their lives. And that's one of the values of somatic sexologists. We don't want our clients to be dependent on us. We don't want to spend years and years and years working on the same thing. We don't want them to be crippled without us. We want them to be able to access pleasure healthy pleasure, extremely exciting, healthy experiences without feeling like they need to pick up the phone and call, you know?
Yeah.
And then the second thing is that then that teaches you how to have integrity with yourself, how to be in alignment with yourself, right? I wasn't in the mood today versus I'm really upset with my partner versus no, like what happened here, I was not okay with. So it's really good to know what is you and what is the other. And if you don't know how to feel your body, then that's not going to work. The other thing about pleasure is, what is pleasure? Pleasure is essentially you enjoying sensation and feeling, consciously enjoying it, right? And the biggest struggle that most people in the world struggle with when it comes to pleasure is distraction. And distraction is just shame materialized, essentially. So when you're in a pleasure experience and you're thinking, did I lock the door? Do I smell okay? Is this angle all right?
Yeah.
Ooh, I need to clean the ceiling. Wow, can't believe I'm thinking about the ceiling right now. And that trail of thought is basically distraction. You know, that distraction is essentially shame. You might not necessarily get the shameful thoughts during your experience itself. And I think that's a blessing, you know, because imagine how difficult it would be. But when distraction shows up, it represents shame. And so much of the work that we do primarily is helping people be present, conscious and present without substances specifically. Like you'll hear so many people saying, oh my gosh, I have the best sex when I'm high. I have the best sex when I'm drunk, you know, just slightly tipsy or on these drugs or these ones. And the reason is because you're able to quiet the mind and you're able to put the distractions aside, and the distractions is basically shame, right? You feel less apologetic, less shameful. And so you just go for it. Now we teach people, somatic sexologists teach people how to just go for it and be completely present and receive all that pleasure and give all that pleasure without having distraction, which is essentially shame boiled down.
Yeah. Yep. Inhibition. It's interesting. And this could be it isn't a whole nother podcast. I'm trying to find someone to talk to about this, of sobriety and sex, because I'm sober. And when I stopped doing drugs and alcohol, it was a transition, and sex was different. And there was periods of like not being comfortable in my body and getting distracted during sex, or, you know, just trying to get it over with because I wasn't okay with, I wasn't familiar, let's say, rather than not okay. And so that, I want to talk to somebody about that. That's a whole nother conversation. But to your point, it's like, that's how a lot of us have functioned with sex, of like needing something to lubricate the experience because we are so in our heads and so not comfortable with receiving pleasure, experiencing pleasure as a culture. And so I wanted to go into a little bit about Middle Eastern culture and what are some common challenges, especially for Middle Eastern women, and what does your practice address with them?
Honestly, I feel like this is going to be the most exciting part of this podcast, probably, because I have seen so many patterns, you know, and I think I am the first to witness them in the region. There has been a lot of patterns that I stumbled upon when I talk amongst my peers who work in different areas of the world. There are definitely some specific things that are common on our side of the world. The one thing that I noticed is a little bit different in my practice in comparison to other somatic sexologists around the world is the following. It's the fact that in the Middle East, there's a very heavy price tag on virginity, but there's an even heavier price tag on virginity than in other places of the world because of the following, because of the idea of keeping the hymen intact. So around the world, there are people whose definition of virginity is do not have sex, or, you know, haven't had sex, or do not have sex before marriage. Yeah.
No penetrative sex.
Thank you so
marriage.
much. Thank you for calling, for calling that out. Yes. Intercourse. So penetration before marriage. However, in the Middle East, it's don't put your finger there. Don't put your finger near there. Nobody's finger goes there. Don't use tampons. Don't use menstrual cups. For some more conservative or extremist families, it will also look like don't ride bikes, don't ride horses.
Girls are told from when they're super, super young that they shouldn't touch the area of their body, their vulva. So what happens is, as young as toddlers, when they're, getting a diaper, nappy change, and they place their hands, that's what happens as a toddler. You want to explore your whole body. So they'll place their hands, the girls will place their hands between their legs, just exploring while they're having a nappy change. And the mom will automatically say, no, don't touch here. Don't touch here. Touching here is dangerous. If you touch here, we will know. Don't touch here. And so what happens when they're told that is that they learn that a part of their body is unsafe, that a part of their body is a place that they should be scared of, and that this part of their body is a space that they should disconnect from. And we actually call it the genital hole. We call it the genital hole. Like it's an actual thing. You can Google it. When someone is not able to sense a certain part of their body because they've been conditioned to disconnect from it. Because what happens as a child, as you're growing and developing, what happens is that the neurons that run from your brain to certain parts of your body connect and get stronger and stronger and stronger over time. That's why younger children aren't able, for example, to open water bottles or a bag of crisps. But as they get older, their neurons, because they're allowed to practice connecting their brain to their fingers in this situation, let's say.
Right.
And then as they practice that, they're able to control that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Or, with brushing your hair, when you're younger, your ponytails look a little bit wonky, but as you practice more, they're kind of more pristine and in the right place. And that's just because of the fact that you get to connect your neurons to these parts of your body. Now, if you're not able to touch your own body, and if you have a fear of touching your own body, then your development completely changes. And this is before the girls even have awareness of any sexual feelings, let alone love, in a romantic sense. And so that was the thing that I picked up in my first year of work. I was like, wow, there's an extra part that I'm doing here that I haven't been trained to do. And that's when I picked it up. What I picked up was that so many women post-marriage were having their first penetrative experience with the first thing that goes inside is somebody else's penis. It's not their finger. It's not the other person's finger. But the first time that anything goes to a place that you feel is foreign, have been told is super dangerous, have been told is not a place you should touch ever. There you are on the first, on the night of your wedding day, legs open, inviting someone else to do that first. And I just want to put a very tangible comparison here, a comparison that everybody listening here can access. Okay. So you remember COVID and PCR tests, right? And how uncomfortable was it someone sticking a stick up our noses? That was really uncomfortable for so many people. I mean, I had to be held down so that I could have someone stick a stick up my nose. And the thing is that whilst that's the case, in this scenario, almost 100% of the people getting PCR tests have stuck their finger up their nose one way or another. And if they say no, they're just lying about it. Everybody has put their finger in their nose at one point in their life and probably still continues to do so, right?
Yeah.
So you're super familiar about your nose. You know how deep it feels. You know what it's like. You have stuck your finger up there. And even though that's the case, there you are in this vulnerable moment where someone is sticking a PCR test up your nose and you feel really unwell.
Yeah.
Now, let's take that as a complete parallel to vaginal penetration. And so while there are so many emotional consequences that come here, the thing that stood out to me the most was the following. I am the practitioner with the highest vaginismus and pain with penetration cases between all of my colleagues, between all of them. And the reason is because, especially when it comes to the female genital anatomy, any pain there is 50% psychological and 50% physical. What I have come to understand is that it is actually really beautiful that that's the case. It's really beautiful that that's the case because your body is not working against you. When you have pain with penetration or when you experience vaginismus, where your muscles are too tight for you to be able to relax to experience penetration, that's a very beautiful message from your body telling you, this is not the time. We are not ready.
It's protecting you.
Yes, it's protecting you. It's a beautiful thing. But then even the treatment that is available, I don't know about the rest of the world, but I definitely know in the region, the treatment that's available for that is Botox, the equivalent of Botox, which is numbing those muscles periodically. So you're basically numbing them so that you can just take it, essentially, stretch the muscle and just take it, which is the complete opposite of pleasure and completely ignores the psychological aspects and reinforces the idea of pain in the long run when you do start feeling, when the Botox wears off and you do start feeling the pain again, right? And then the other thing is that psychologically, you have this disconnect. You're like, I really love my partner. It's always the line that I get. It's always, I really, really love my partner. I just think I have a low desire. I just think that I have low desire and I'm not really interested in having sex. Or I really, really love my partner. I can't believe we went on our honeymoon and we weren't able to consummate the marriage, which is essentially penetration, right? And the first question I ask when someone tells me, I think I just have low desire, the first question I ask is 0 to 10, 0 being nothing terrible, not great, 10 being mind-blowing, my dream sex life. How great is the quality of the sex you're having?
Yeah.
Why would you crave not so great sex again? And love does not equal incredible sex.
Right.
To experience incredible sex, that needs to be figured out. And it takes time, especially with new partners. And especially if you haven't explored yourself, and for the sake of this conversation, I just want to say that when I say sex, I mean a sexual experience. I don't mean penis in vagina.
Right. Exactly. Interaction in sex, desire, touching a partner, interacting with a partner.
Yeah.
More specifically. You mentioned,
absolutely.
Oh, sorry. You mentioned in our pre-call, and I wanted to point this out too, of like the idea that a lot of your clients who come to you have very supportive male partners. And so that was something, it wasn't shocking to me, but I think it is something that's like, needs to be said and stated because of cultural understanding and thinking like, okay, this is the way that when you explain like from a very young age, young women are, told this is dangerous, don't touch yourself, to the point of like even examinations don't happen. Like, so if there is something wrong and a woman isn't married, hasn't had sex, she might not be examined.
Yeah.
And then to speak to the idea that
she definitely won't be.
Yeah.
It's not even a might. Like, she definitely won't be examined internally because, God forbid the hymen is broken, which is, we all know scientifically is not at all a representation of virginity.
But I wanted to speak to
I'd love to.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to speak to the idea that we could then hear that and think, oh, well, it's because men don't care, or men are looking at women as just the vessel to have sex into, and it's not a partnership. But you are working with a lot of people and the partner is actually wanting their partner to experience pleasure and to share how they feel and to provide them with what they need. And it's you're having to unravel, let's say, the woman's belief around her own body to help them get there. Like, it's not a matter of like the husband, boyfriend is dismissive of her experience. There's a lot of that. And I think we need to share that, because I think it's important for people to know that like this isn't to hear that side of it and then think, oh, well, culturally it's because they also have men who don't care.
Well, Kat, you know what? I was born and raised in this culture, and that's what I thought. And I always say one of the biggest blessings of doing this job is my empathy and recognition towards men when it comes to sex and pleasure in the Middle Eastern world. I empathize so much now. I thought exactly that. I thought women are oppressed. Women aren't allowed to experiment. Women aren't allowed to explore. And there's this heavy, price tag on their virginity. Whereas although the men come from the same religion and the same culture, it is more socially acceptable for them to essentially experiment and have sex. And virginity is not a requirement before marriage. Now, the beautiful thing is, I just have to clarify first that the couples that come and work with me are a very niche market. And the reason that they are is that they're couples who, first of all, are willing to go out of their comfort zone to speak to someone about their pleasure and about their sex life, which is very uncomfortable, given that they probably tell me things that they don't even tell their friends. And they need to cross a certain shame boundary first there, to be able to even tell me who they are and talk to me. So that's very unique, to care enough about your partner having pleasure and not to just be selfish about it, and to be willing to do that. That already like kind of puts us in a niche market. And then the second thing is having the time and space to be able to invest in your pleasure. That's not standard for everyone. Definitely on the financial side, it's not a standard at all. Like not everybody has the luxury of time and space and money to be able to do so. So I just want to be very clear there. Now, given that I've clarified that, the partners that I receive, especially the male partners, really care. I hear things like, I don't want her to do it just because she has to. I want to know how she can enjoy it. I don't want her to fake it. I don't want her to feel like it's not as exciting for her as it is for me. I want to feel desired. There's an energy when it comes. Sex is one of the most vulnerable experiences that you can have with another person. And not feeling wanted in that experience, even for males, is felt, And so they feel lost. They feel like they don't understand what to do. And they feel like here they are with this person that they love so, so deeply. And vice versa too. Usually the female also loves the male partner deeply, deeply. But the thing is that she loves him so much that she's willing to forgo her own pleasure, or because she doesn't know what to do. She's stuck, right? And so that's what I realized. I realized that yes, the males have not been robbed of their sexual development the same way that the females have been, but they definitely lack a lot of empathy, and they definitely lack a lot of understanding. Because when I explain the sexual development that the males go through their lives, because when they're walking around sticking their hands down their pants as toddlers or children, their moms don't tell them, don't touch this area. Their parents don't shame them for touching their parts. They just say, this isn't appropriate to touch in front of people in public. Please touch your private parts when you are alone. But the messaging on the female side is completely different, right? And so when I say that, things start to make sense, and you can see it. You can see the male partner just kind of like breathing softer, shoulders are more relaxed, like a light bulb just goes bing, and they're like, oh, okay, I get it. Because there's also sometimes a lot of frustration where they look at their female partner and they say, tell me what you want. I'm willing to do foreplay for as long as you want. I'm willing to do whatever, but she can't even stay present during the foreplay. And she doesn't even know what kind of foreplay feels good for her and what doesn't, because she's never been allowed to explore that for herself. And I think this is a really, really important part, because your relationship with your sexuality is absolutely essential to the quality of your relationship when it comes to having a partner, or the quality of your relationship with a partner in partnered experiences.
Yeah. I'm like just taking that in for a moment, because it's so important. And it's something that, like, regardless of culture or region or where you live, that is something that we're all kind of faced with, of how we engage with ourselves.
Yeah.
And imagining like here we have people who don't explore and, you know, masturbate, let's say, but to imagine like that is a part of the culture and the region. And so I want people to understand that, because you and I chatted about that too, of like, yes, we have pockets of conservative places and religion that dictate sometimes our sexuality here in this country as well as other countries. But this is like regionality culturally.
Let's take a quick break. Are you tired of the hormonal roller coaster that comes with birth control pills? 11 years ago, I decided to ditch hormonal birth control and embark on a journey to find a more natural alternative. Over the years, I've used condoms, calendar tracking methods, and withdrawal, which can sometimes be pretty risky and stress-inducing practices. However, I've discovered a game changer, Natural Cycles. It's an FDA-cleared birth control app that has brought me peace of mind like never before. Whether you're planning or preventing pregnancy, Natural Cycles has got your back. Let's talk about numbers for a moment, even though I hate numbers. Natural Cycles is 98% effective when used properly. And here's the best part. You're not putting any extra hormones into your body. It's all about understanding your cycle and making informed decisions. Ready to start your hormone-free birth control journey? Use the link in our episode description to get 15% off the annual subscription for Natural Cycles. That's right, 15% off to take charge of your reproductive health in a natural and effective way. Say goodbye to those hormonal ups and downs and hello to a birth control approach that aligns with your body. And now back to our episode.
And so as a practitioner, how do you respect the cultural norms, but then also kind of challenge and break through these stigmas through these, you know, like how do you, because it is like you even, you know, started the conversation with like, this was part of your own experience. Like you came to this because of what you were experiencing yourself and breaking down your own, like deconditioning your cultural beliefs and like being exposed to things and being like, okay, my brain is doing this, my body's doing this. So how do you also still maintain a respect for the culture and a respect for where people are at with their own culture, religion, whatever their stuff is that's filtering through them? How do you balance that?
Kat, this is probably one of my favorite interviews because I've never had anyone pay attention to such essential details. And probably if you weren't me, you wouldn't even be thinking about that. So it's really impressive that you are. I feel like the path that I have been on for the last years of my life was basically prepping me for this without me knowing. Because I introduced pole to the Middle Eastern industry. And not only did it expand in the country that I am in multiples, there's over 25 studios in Cairo alone today, but also across the region, right? And so I had to do that by titrating very small baby steps. The way that I handle that with my clients, I think that there's a lot of intuition that I have that comes from the knowledge and the experience that I've had over the last, 11 years of pole dance in the Middle East. But the other part is that I can really relate because I come from the same background and I know what is cultural and what is religious. And one of the things that I'm very clear on from the very beginning in my intake is I don't touch any beliefs or ideologies about religion. But if you're not willing to unlearn and question and check what you would like to keep in your sexual garden that has been taught by culture, and what would you like to uproot and shed that has been conditioned by your culture, then I'm not the right practitioner for you. And I feel like that's really, really important. And I mean, just the fact that they show up and they start speaking and the way they feel, my clients, between the beginning of the session, of the very first session versus the end, is already something that is not common in culture. You know, we don't talk about sex in this culture. We don't talk about sexual pleasure in this culture, even in the circumstances and scenarios where it is allowed and permitted and completely okay. That's the part. So I think if I were to give you a direct answer to how do I, as a sexologist, address the challenges that come up for me when it comes to conditioning and messages and beliefs that people have, that has essentially been ingrained in people's minds and bodies for years. What I do is I address the culture, but I don't address the religion.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, and I'm no Muslim religious expert, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but there are other sexologists, like you said, who are fantastic with specializing in specifically the Muslim religion around the world.
Mm-hmm.
There are many references there where they talk about the relationship between religion and self-pleasure and that there isn't a contradiction there. And so if somebody asks me about that, I say, listen, it's not my specialty, but here are some resources that I found that don't go against that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I believe that it's really, really difficult to completely transform and enhance a partnered sexual relationship without doing any type of self-touch or self-practice. How can you enjoy something if you don't know what it is? You don't know what it is. How can you enjoy it, let alone teach somebody else, right?
Yeah, truly.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because we don't teach that in sex education. That's not included in this country, at least. It's a lot of prevention.
Yeah.
It's a lot of penetration. It's a lot of preventing pregnancy and STIs, but there's not a lot about self-exploration and just touch and what feels good and what doesn't feel good.
It's not pleasure focused.
It's never pleasure focused. It's not body positive either. I wanted to ask you, and if you don't mind sharing a little bit about how this transitioning into this realm and this kind of work, how has it impacted your personal relationships? And I know that you and your husband have a podcast and you speak about your relationship as well as kind of the work that you're doing. And so how has that, like in your friendships, in your family, how has that been received, especially with the umbrella of culture over top of it all?
So, you know what? There are very few things in my life that I have done that feel like my life before this and my life after that. And if there were other scenarios that I'd say that was my life before and after, they look more like really bad accidents or injuries or surgery. Do you know what I mean? Like they're not the kind of stuff that you know, they're not exhilarating experiences anyways. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So there has been a huge, huge difference in my life before meeting the work of pleasure and sexology versus after. When it comes to my personal relationship, my ability to even access pleasure was completely different before this.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
mm-hmm.
My partner is still the same person. His body parts are exactly the same. His techniques and talents are exactly the same, but I am able to receive. I'm in a place now in my life where I am able to sit in my body and completely feel alive during pleasure experiences. And so, of course, that's been transformational for our relationship, you know, and it was also especially hard when neither of us really knew what was happening, you know. I just thought I was one of those girls, just one of them who, you know, was an overthinker, or one of those girls who just couldn't orgasm. But
Mm-hmm.
I was one of them, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And so it's completely different there. The other thing is that it's also made it easy for us to communicate with each other what it is that we want and where else we'd like to play and discover, and for it not to feel super awkward or uncomfortable or to be tiptoeing around each other, worrying that we're going to hurt each other's feelings because, well, you know, essentially that's essentially what I do a lot with couples work. I help them communicate what they want in a really nice, fun, light way
Mm-hmm.
without them feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm going to say what I want. And then after that, there's going to be the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
You know,
it's going to blow everything up.
And so I've implemented the same techniques. Oh yeah. And that's one of the biggest fears, by the way. So
Mm-hmm.
many people don't say what they want just because they're so scared that their partner is going to feel like they're not enough. So that's on the side with like my partner. With my friends, it's really interesting, especially when it comes to my male friends, because I only work with women and couples and I don't work with single or individual men, right? So I needed to get some information. And so I started asking my male friends specifically. I've always been someone who talks to my female friends about pleasure, but not so much the males. And so that's been really interesting because what I realized is that they don't even talk to each other about sexual pleasure. You know, they say when things happen and when things don't happen, but that's it. And so there was this one time where I was hanging out with a bunch of my guy friends. And I started a conversation doing research, trying to collect information. And I left, and 4 hours later, one of them messages me going, "You started the conversation and it has not ended. 1 a.m. in the morning and we're still talking about sex."
Wow.
You know? And I realized it was the first time. And these are people who have grown up together, who feel really, really safe and close to each other. A community of people who have no kind of, like no judgments or any kind of like prejudice when it comes to sexuality and all that kind of stuff, which is super, super rare on this side of the world, right? But they've never spoken to each other. Never.
They needed the permission.
And so that was really interesting. Yeah. And then with my family, I mean, the first time I said it, they were like, "Oh gosh, here we go again. You know, this one always chooses the jobs that just either don't exist or are completely wild." Or, you know, at the beginning, it was kind of like that. And then what happened is they started asking me questions, you know, a little bit, obviously, like not right away, right? But little by little, what happens now is, you know, I'll receive a call from my mom and she'll be asking me questions for her friends or like her friends' kids, you know, like her, not kids, well, they're adults.
Yes.
Like children.
Adult children, yeah.
Children, you know. And the other day, there was like this big gathering where like all her friends were together and I went to just go say hi. And then before I knew it, I was cross-legged on the floor for 2 hours talking to these women about their bodies and about pleasure and about what happens. And at the beginning, everybody was kind of looking at each other. These are women like well in their 50s, right? So they were kind of looking at each other, judging each other and saying like, "How do you know about that? Why are you asking this?" And then before I knew it, everybody had kind of really relaxed and just genuinely was interested. And so it's really interesting because when you take shame into the light, it disappears. And that's exactly what has happened in all the circles that are around me. You know, I talk about something, people feel a little bit taken back. They feel like it's safe and comfortable and that I'm comfortable while I'm talking. And they can access that energy and they can observe it. And then they go, "Okay, well, I'll just take a little step forward towards that and just say something really, really small." And in that, there's so much liberation just in speaking and voicing what you want or what you've experienced or what was hard for you. Just in voicing that, or even somebody else's experience. Maybe it's one of your friends.
Hearing
just
someone.
In voicing that, there is so much liberation.
I have found that as well. Like since I started doing this, it's funny because my previous career, we talked about this a little bit, was in hair care, and I was a hairdresser. And so I'd go to like weddings or parties and people would be like, "What do you do?" And I say, "Oh, I'm a hairdresser." And people are like, "What should I do with my hair? Should I get bangs? Should I color my hair?" La, 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 la. And now when I tell people I work in sexual wellness, I have a sexual wellness podcast and a brand, people are like, "Oh," and it's so surprising to me, the strangers and the conversations that like people are ready. It's like on the tip of their tongue, ready to be like, "I haven't had sex in months. I'm experiencing erectile dysfunction. I have pain during sex. What do I do?" You know, or I know somebody. And so I think we're at this place where everyone's kind of ready and they just need to be given permission. And people like yourself, people like myself are like the light that kind of gives people the permission, but it also isn't intimidating. It's not scary. It's a disarming experience where you can relax into it and feel okay with, like you were saying, like just a little bit, like a sentence or spilling your guts out and like letting it all lay out on the floor. And what I love about it is that whether you don't speak up at all, the person who's maybe not speaking up at all is sitting there listening and feeling seen, validated, and might. And that's the whole premise of this podcast and why I wanted to do this, is that perhaps you're listening and it might not be explicit to you. Like you might not be going through menopause. You might not be having erectile dysfunction. You might not have to unravel conditioning from your culture around your own body and autonomy, but you might know somebody who does. And so you can relate to them better, understand them better, or offer them to listen to this podcast. And I am so appreciative of having this conversation with you, and I would love for you to share where people can find you, how they can work with you, what you're doing, what you're up to.
So the easiest way for people to find me is through my Instagram. That's Mint Elmokadm. They can probably just check yours and like find the tag there.
Yeah, we'll have it in the show notes.
That's the
for
easiest
sure.
way. Yeah, absolutely. That's like the easiest way for people to reach me. I do also teach pleasure-focused courses online. So all of my work is very much pleasure-focused sex education. So I do one-on-one work. I also have this new service that I just started doing where you can basically have communication with me, like Q&A support for about a month, where you're able to just, ask me questions, I answer, ask me questions, and I answer. And I have a limited amount of people that I do that with on a monthly basis, but I've found that it's super, super useful. And then the third thing that I do is pleasure-focused sex education. And it ranges between so many different things. I have a course that is focused on what you wish you knew about sexual pleasure. I find that a lot of the times when I'm on this first call, the first intake, where I'm collecting information for a potential one-on-one client, that they don't need to work with me. They just needed to understand how their body works, and I explain it to them, and then I'm like, you don't need me. You just needed to learn this, and that's it. You're okay. And so that's basically all those questions compressed into one course. And then I also have another course, which is basically about mapping out your erotic self. So knowing exactly everything about you, what turns you on and off when it comes to your mind, and also how you like to be touched, where. So everything about the body, everything about the mind. And you leave essentially with like a map about you. Even what are the things that make certain sexual experiences for you like a 10-10-10, and how to make sure you don't get back to that with that ex-boyfriend or that toxic partner who just seems to somehow, for some reason, give you the best sex in the world. How to be able to have super exciting experiences without choosing unhealthy partners for you. But yeah, the best way to reach me is through my Instagram, and that's it.
Is there anything we missed or that you wanted to talk about and share before we kind of wrap up?
Kat, I have to say, I have done many interviews in my life, and this has by far been one of the best prepped questions I have ever been asked in my life about any kind of profession that I've ever done.
Oh, wow.
So I feel complete.
Thank you so much for saying that. That means a lot to me. I really appreciate you being on, you being a guest. And
you are a terrific interviewer.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, and for being vulnerable and sharing your own experiences. Because I think that's so important for people to hear and know the path that you took to get to where you are. And I think it's so important for people to know that like, we're not alone in any of this. And even though like culturally, there are certain things, like I hope that people listen to this who are in other countries and other places and go, oh, wait, that's something that I have experienced. So it might not be on a cultural level, but it's something that they can absolutely resonate with and then take and find the support that they need and find what they need for themselves and their bodies, as well as how to communicate with their partners. So I think it's important with the somatic work and understanding that it is completely not an intimidating experience. And it's especially if you are familiar with wellness, breath work, awareness, body work, touch. Those are all parts of, I do Reiki, I do yoga teaching, I do restorative yoga, and those are all a part of my practice. So it's not anything that is intimidating or unachievable. It's completely accessible. And so I love that how you broke that down. I appreciate that so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much for having me. Honestly, this was completely coincidental. We've never met in real life, and here we are.
Yeah.
And it's definitely been one of the best interviews I've had. I enjoyed the conversation.
Special thanks to all of our guests. Head South is hosted by Kat Meyer, produced by Isis Barlow, edited by Megan Hook, with with music by Lily Rezi Rothman, graphics by Ella Chodos Irvine, cover art by Gina Ship Casey, and intro by Murph Meyer.
If you're looking for me, I'm heading south. All year round I'm going down. Now you know where I'll be, I'm heading south. So come on, look me right in the mouth.